Live from the Deer and Deer Hunting headquarters here in Iola, Wisconsin. Welcome to Wednesday. Welcome to Deer Talk Now. I'm Dan Schmidt. He's Brian Lovett. Thanks for joining us once again. We got a great show today. More great questions from everyone, from Facebook to Twitter to Google+, Pinterest. People have been logging in from and asking questions. Thank you for all the questions. We're going to get right at it. Brian, another great spring day here in Wisconsin, finally.
It is. The rumor has it that spring has arrived. I did see actually one little patch of snow out in the woods this morning. I was out looking around for turkeys, but it was almost, 70 degrees yesterday, so we think we might have winter beat finally, although it is supposed to snow maybe next week.
Oh my gosh, I hope not. Please, no. We're moving to Alabama if that happens. Well, let's get to it. We have lots of questions. We've had last week's show. I want to thank everybody for logging in, especially because we had so many questions come in, especially off of the Google Plus account for Deer and Deer Hunting. And if you're not on Facebook, please get there because we're nearing in on 400,000 fans. Thank you to everybody who's been logging in on Facebook and asking questions. Tons of great questions, a lot of bow hunting questions, and we're going to get to some of those right away.
Yeah, and like you say, from all over. The first one is from Emily in South Carolina, and she lets us know that last year before the bow season in her area, she was seeing two does and a spike buck feeding together. Now, she always thought that during summer, bucks and does were separate because bucks were in their bachelor groups and the does were with their family groups. However, these deer were always together. Now, the area she's hunting is very small, and she wants to know, did the deer hanging around together, is that the result of it being a small property, or is it some other factor at work here, Dan?
That's a good question, Emily. Thank you. I think Emily asked this question last week, too. But that's a common one that we get. And what we know here, I'm reading into her question a little bit here because I don't know everything, but she said two does and a spike buck. Mm-hmm. Chances are what you have there are a doe with two of its offspring, and chances are that spike buck and one of those does are siblings.
So that's the previous year's fawns.
Previous year's fawns. That spike buck is probably a year and a half old. What you have there in especially early fall, what's interesting and what we've learned over the years through countless research studies, is that a buck, a male whitetail, will normally disperse twice in his lifetime. So once he's going to disperse when he's a fawn, and once he's going to disperse when he's 1.5 years old. A lot of times those deer will delay that first dispersal, so they'll actually stay with their mothers and those female groups for that first year. So that buck right there, he's actually looking at, well, it's his first set of antlers. He's 1.5 years old. He's probably with his mother. He hasn't dispersed yet. He will disperse that fall, especially if that's early bow season. And sometimes it's delayed. A lot of times what you have there, what we know through doe groups, is that maternal matriarch doe will have a small home range. So her home range could be anywhere from, it could be 50 acres, it could be 100 acres, up to 200 acres normally. That's what you have, and she's going to stay in that area, and her fawns are going to be with her. So that little buck is probably going to be with her. Now, when does he disperse? He'll disperse that fall because now he's being pushed out to new territories and new ranges, and that's why you see a lot of, there's a good question there because that's why you see a lot of roadkills in fall, and that's why you see a lot of roadkills now in spring, the first dispersal. And what happens is those deer are, they're crossing roads that they've never crossed before. They're entering territories that they haven't been before. They're not familiar with those areas. You get hit on the roads. But it's a good question, Emily. I'm going to say that spike buck is probably the offspring of that older doe. If not, if his mother was shot, he's probably hanging with that, that maternal group. So it could be, it's kind of, you know, those does live in linked maternal groups. So it could be that doe's aunts, sisters, whatever. But it's a good question. It's one that's not easily understood when you see deer like that hanging out together.
I guess you'll probably find out this fall, you know, whether she sees those deer again together or whether that spike buck disperses and is nowhere to
Yeah.
be seen.
Well, it'll be hard to
area,
tell
so.
too, because that deer is probably going to have, he'll have a branched rack this year, so you're not going to know what he was last year. But
Right,
it's a great question. Thank you, Emily, and everybody who answers questions. Some people asked, just send me an email. You can send it through Facebook, Twitter, whatever you want. Just get a hold of me. Give me your mailing address, and you're going to get a free whitetail rut calendar if we use your question on air.
All right, next one is from Dan in Wisconsin.
This isn't me, though.
Okay.
It's not a planted question.
I mean, Don. No, it's Dan. He's got a practical question. He gun hunts from the ground between a U-shaped ridge, and the ridge tops are about 100 yards apart. He has his ground blind about a third of the top from one of the ridges, but he's asking, should he put a blind on both of the ridges depending on wind direction, I'm guessing, so he can hunt in any wind direction?
Good question, and he just answered it. Absolutely, I would. As you know, too, Brian, hunting in Wisconsin and hunting actually anywhere in like a kettle moraine area where the glaciers have gone through and you have hills and valleys and things like that, the way the wind and the thermals affect your scent is huge when you're deer hunting, especially if you're hunting off the ground. You like to have as many options as possible. And what I would do, absolutely, I would hunt one of the spots based off of wind direction, but also keep into mind how thermals affect your scent dispersal, because as you know, mornings are different than afternoons, how that those wind currents are being drawn up and down valleys and things like that.
Yeah, and I guess we don't have to deal with it quite as much here. We have more rolling topography, but boy, as you mentioned, in that river country or like southwestern Wisconsin, those driftless or unglaciated areas, I mean, those thermals make that a whole different ballgame there, especially during bow season.
Absolutely, yeah, bow season, and that's it's a little bit different when you're hunting out of a tree, but when you're hunting off the ground, wind direction and thermals are huge, because if you don't have that in your favor, if your wind is actually blowing to where you think, or the thermals are taking your scent to where you think those deer are coming from, those are the days you don't see too many deer, and you don't know why, and that's probably why.
Right. You might think you have the wind in your favor when you walk in, but you get to your stand, and I know a lot of guys will sit there and just check it intensely just to make sure that their wind is blowing the direction they want it to, and if it's not, I mean, really the only choice is to really get down so you don't blow those deer out of there.
It's a great point. It's a great point, because if you're checking that wind direction and you have especially if you're hunting off the ground and you have a backup spot, get out of that blind and go to the other one. Yeah. That's not going to hurt anything. I mean, getting to where you're going, especially if you're gun hunting. I mean, gun hunting is, you have that luxury of you're going to be able to shoot, well, in the woods 100, 150, 200 yards, whatever it be. It's not like you're bow hunting and the deer are going to walk across that scent stream that you just moved to a different spot. But I would, I've mentioned this before on this show, I've mentioned it before in other places. One of the very first interviews I did with a noted hunter when I got here at Deer and Deer Hunting was with Miles Keller from Minnesota, and that was back when we were doing the magazines for Realtree. And I asked him, can you have too many stands on a small property? And he said no. I mean, he told me of examples where he had 40 acres or smaller properties, and he'd have 10 or 15 stand sites on them.
Oh my gosh.
And he said it's all about wind direction. It's all about where you think those deer are bedding, where they're coming from, where they're feeding, and how can you get there and get in between them and where they want to go while you're hunting. So it's a good question, and I would always have ample options that you can be flexible and move when you have to.
Right. Might not need it every day, but boy, when you do, it's going to be important to have that.
Yep, so, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. And another question is from Todd. He's in Virginia, and he's asking about early season bow hunting. He says when he hunts, there's usually so much foliage in the trees that he sets his climber up lower in the tree. However, he's been busted by deer seeing him in the past. His question is, what's a good height for him to set that climber at in the early season?
Wow, some great questions coming in here. And this is Todd, you said, from Virginia. Virginia, a little bit different topography than what we have here in the Midwest. It's a great question, and one that we actually could talk all morning on the various options and things you should do. What I always tell people, first of all, you have to preface anything you say about hunting out of a tree is only hunt out of from a height that you feel comfortable. Do not climb a tree higher If you're not going to feel comfortable, you're not going to be comfortable, and you're not going to be safe. And so if you don't feel comfortable climbing above 12 or 14 feet, do not do that. Come up with other options. There isn't a magical distance or height to hunt from, but one thing that I've learned when I was younger, I was more willing to do this, but the higher you climb, if you're comfortable with it, the better your odds of not being scented. And this was taught to me by some of those great bow hunters from the South, guys from Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, those guys that have to hunt pine plantations, and they're hunting with climbers. And you know, they're being safe, they're wearing their full body harness, and they're doing all the right things, being attached to the tree from the time they leave the ground to the time they're up there hunting. But some of these guys, like I said, now this is only for you if you can stomach it, but some of those guys hunt 30, 40 feet up in a tree. That's high. And other people think that's just blasphemy to even say that you should be hunting that high out of a tree. If you can hunt, the higher you can hunt, what happens is the scent is actually being drawn down the tree and being dispersed, and that scent cone, the higher you up, is smaller. So your odds of having that scent stream being broadcast farther out are reduced. But at the same time, I know other guys who only hunt 10 or 15 feet off the ground and they kill piles of huge bucks. But that is all about, it's like Dan asking his question about ground blinds. It's all about placement. It's all about knowing where those deer are coming from. If you're in between a bedding area and a feeding area and you know how they're actually getting there, if there's a trail or if you just know that there's a little wrinkle in the topography and how they're going to get there, that's all about knowing. It's like turkey hunting. I mean, it's about knowing the land and how the animals are using it. But it's my long-winded way of saying there isn't a magical number. I prefer to hunt about 20 feet out of a tree, but that stand has got to be placed in a good spot. And the other thing, too, is early season with foliage, lots of different considerations there. Right. I mean, you might not be able to shoot 15, 20 yards if there's all this foliage and you're up. So being high up in that tree is not going to help you.
Right, yeah, I'm assuming if you're in amongst that foliage too, you know, you don't have any lanes cut, and if you're cutting lanes, you're kind of, you know, disturbing that area a little bit. I mean, it's really kind of a tricky situation, honestly. Yeah. Like you said, you almost have to have such a great prior knowledge of that area before going in, and just have, like you said, a stand where you can shoot, you know, in that situation. So a lot of variables, I guess.
You want some really great tips, and we're going to talk about the store specials later, but John Eberhardt has got some great videos and books on this topic, on how to hunt pressure deer and how to prepare your stands beforehand. And that's a key, especially when using a climber. I mean, it's really difficult to go into a spot, put a climber on a tree that you haven't been to before, and then climb it, and then you get up there, and it's like, I can't see, I don't have a place to shoot. Right. There's a branch right there at 10 feet, you know, so that's one thing, like now, especially in spring, you know, April and May, and even June, getting out there and okay, this is probably a tree I want to hunt from, climb that thing with your climber, and check it out, and say, well, I might have to clip a few branches here to get a shot, or whatnot, and so then you're gonna be able to gauge how high you can go, and what's probably going to be good enough come hunting season, then tweak it when you get there.
Right, and I think John, he does most of his prep work like that early, and then he'll actually, the only thing he'll do before the season is maybe just take a quick visit, see if he needs any refreshing work in that stand, then he's out of there. He just leaves those stand sites completely
Leaves it alone, and he hunts, when he goes in there, his stands aren't already placed, so he's bringing his stand back with him, or he's hunting out of a tree saddle. So basically he's going back in there, but absolutely, get in there now. If you can use it, if you're hunting on private land, you can use a pole saw, you know, a pole pruner, whatnot. Get yourself a good pair of pruners and clip a little spot. I do not like, this is another topic, but I do not like blazing shooting lanes. There's my phone, I better turn that off. But I do not like blazing shooting lanes. I just like to clip a little branch here and there. It's like, okay, I can shoot one shot there, one shot over there, or maybe get a shot behind me.
Right.
And that kind of thing. And that really helps out a lot.
Yeah, so many variables in this situation, but hopefully that helped, Todd.
Thank you, Todd, very much. You get a whitetail calendar. Email us your address, and we're going to get that right to you. It's got the rut predictions in there, Charlie Alsheimer's annual rut predictions. Everybody loves it. And it's great photography too, so it's a nice thing for your office or at home. Brian, a couple questions came in various forms, And seeing that you are a resident turkey hunting expert, and it is turkey season, and the Turkey Tuesday bonus coverage at deeranddeerhunting.com has been taken off, and there's a lot of deer hunters who like to turkey hunt.
Oh yeah.
Couple common questions that came through. I actually did this again, high tech, put them on my phone, but and you actually have a story on this that people can read right now on the website. But and I go through it too every year. Decoys. When should I use them? Should I be using them? What are some tips when turkey hunting with a decoy? What kind should I use, and when should I use them?
Yeah, to me the number one consideration when deciding on whether or not to use a decoy is just where your setup's at, where you intend to try to call that turkey to. If it's an open area and the turkey can see for a long ways, you pretty much have to use a decoy to give some visual reassurance to your calling. You know, I think years ago, Ben Lee told a story about the graveyard gobbler. That's when you're walking at night through a cemetery and all of a sudden you hear a voice say, you know, hey, Dan, come over here, and you look over there and there's no one there. I mean, you're not going to walk through the graveyard in the middle of the night to go check out that voice. Same thing with a turkey. I mean, you could be in a big pasture, 40-acre pasture on the edge of the woods, yelp to him and he gobbles and he looks up, he doesn't see a hen. He might sit there and gobble at a safe distance for a while, but it is completely unnatural for him not to see that hen, and he's not going to approach within range, probably. You know, there's never an always, but probably. So, I mean, in open field situations, pastures, ag land, things like that, if I'm setting up and calling in those areas, I'm going to use a decoy for visual reassurance, you know. If I'm in the woods where I really prefer to hunt turkeys, I'm much more apt just to use the terrain and the foliage to try to find situations where I'm calling from a spot where when the turkey sees the source of the calling, he's already in range and I can shoot him right there, you know, whether that's bend in a logging road, a little ridge top, gooseberry bushes, you know, other thick cover, anything that would obscure his vision. I mean, then he's going to hear the calling and respond to it, and because of those obstructions or whatever visual obstructions, it's not unnatural for him to want to approach because, you know, he instinctively knows that, okay, well, I just can't see the hen, that's not unnatural. And he will often approach to that. And when he comes around that bend or over the top of the ridge or whatever, the first thing he's usually going to do is going to stop and pop his head up and look for the source of the calling. And if that's 25 to 40 yards away, I mean, your turkey hunt's over right there, and you shoot him right there. So, you know, I really like to find little kill spots like that and call from there. You kind of get in tricky situations sometimes where you're hunting maybe logged over woods or open woods, where a turkey can see you for a while, but you don't have any other options to call to him. I really don't like using decoys in the woods. For whatever reason, they don't seem to respond to them as well in the woods, and sometimes if they're walking through the woods and they see a decoy, it almost startles them a little bit. But, you know, at the same token, if a turkey can see the source of the calling and there's nothing there, I mean, you're kind of in trouble anyway. So I would tend to use decoys in those situations, you know. And you know, people always ask me all the time about what kind of decoy setups do you like, you know, and I'm pretty minimal. You know, this time of the season where they're still doing a lot of sorting out of the pecking orders, you know, is a good time to use a strutter or a Jake decoy and, you know, 2 or 3 hens together because it looks natural like a breeding flock or a wad of turkeys, you know. Late in the season, as the hens are going off to lay eggs or even nesting, I'm much more apt just to use a single hen decoy and place that out, you know, again, just for the simple visual reassurance for calling. So, I mean, there's a lot of nuances to it as well, you know, but generally, open areas, I'm going to use a decoy, and the later it gets, the more likely I am just to go down to one single decoy.
That's some great information and some great advice, Brian. Now, like when you're hunting in a field situation or an open area situation, does it hurt you to have 2, 3, 4 decoys out there as opposed to just one?
I'd say generally not. You know, especially you just have to kind of gauge the phase of the breeding season you're in too. You know, I mean, our turkeys here are just really breaking up right now. You know, and you're seeing now finally a lot of those classic little wads with, you know, 2 gobblers, 6, 7 hens like that. I mean, so having, you know, 3, 4 hen decoys out is not going to seem unnatural at all. I mean, it's going to look pretty normal to that gobbler, you know. The strutter decoy, that's always a big question because the old saying goes, it either brings them running or sends them running, right. One of the two. You know, it really depends on, you know, that turkey and where he's at in that particular pecking order of those local birds. I mean, if he's been whipped up on a little bit, he's going to be very hesitant to approach a strutter decoy. If he's been doing a lot of whipping up on other turkeys himself, he'll probably run right into the strutter
Yeah.
decoy. You just never know unless you're kind of familiar with the individual temperament of that gobbler. You know, it's always kind of a
That is a
catch-22.
tough thing
Yeah.
to go. I've had it go both ways.
Yep.
I've put out a strutter decoy and turkeys just ran from it.
Yes.
But then I put out a breeding set last year and killed my turkey that way. So
Right.
I mean, it is. I think that's a good point. It's kind of an individual thing. You talk about. This is our last question for today. But you talk about phase of the breeding season, and I find that really fascinating. And you have a lot of good insight, not only just on decoy use during which phase of the breeding season you're in, but calling tactics. Expand. We had a lot of questions on that. Expand a little bit on that. What kind of calling tactics are you going to use going from early, like right now, the first week or two of the season, as you get into fourth, fifth, sixth week of the season?
It's again, it's tough to gauge. I mean, generally, with any turkey, you know, I'm just going to try to take his temperature right away. You know, I mean, if he's a hot gobbling turkey and is hitting every call I throw at him, you know, you can get away with calling at him quite a bit. You know, he can gobble all the way to the gun, which is a lot of fun. Or you can get him fired up and just go quiet, and he's going to come looking for you. And both are great tactics. You know, if he's, you know, gobbles at every third, fourth series, just is kind of like a turkey messing around, doesn't seem all that fired up, I'm going to tone my calling back a little too, kind of play coy, just try to sound like a hen that's, you know, messing around and not particularly interested in him, you know, soft yelping, clucking and purring, even scratching in the leaves. Really, to me, the change seasonally relates a lot to calling to hens, you know, if you're trying to call the hens into a gobbler. Early in the season, like I said, those pecking orders are still very much in flux. And there's a lot of, you know, fights and disputes even among hen groups like there are with gobbler groups. So you can get hens really fired up with aggressive yelping and cutting early in the season, you know, and a lot of times they'll come at you when you mimic them, you know, and drag a gobbler in tow too. As the breeding season progresses in earnest and they're actually with gobblers and doing a lot of breeding, they tend to be a little more antisocial, and when they hear that hen yelping, they'll actually sometimes just pick their heads up and walk away and take a gobbler away.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of peak breeding mode, you know. And later in the season, you can kind of you can still interest the hens too, you know. But I'll always try to, I think someone called it asking permission first, you know. Start real soft and subtle with them, no rasp, and just try to get them to respond and see if they respond to that, and only get aggressive if they get aggressive. A lot of times you'll play on their social curiosity and kind of bring them in that way. So, I mean, it's really, you know, that's about the only seasonal change I do in my calling. I will say, like early in the season right now, or especially last week when the hens really aren't interested in the gobblers are very receptive to calling, you know, so you can, I think you saw it yourself with your turkey you shot last week. I mean, you called a gobbler from a long way, where later in the season, if he had hens that he met in a particular area, he might not have been so eager to come all that way.
Right.
But how far away was that turkey?
Turkey was, he had to be, well, it was an entire 40-acre parcel plus another half of 40-acre parcel. So he came from 60 acres away. But I unknowingly did what you just said there is, you know, I took his temperature a little bit, just the fact I got him to gobble, which I didn't even think there was a turkey there. Yelped pretty aggressively. And then when I knew he was coming, I cut at him once, yelped a little more, and then put the call down and let him, like you said, let him hunt for me.
Yeah.
And that's something that you taught me years ago, is that if you can get him to gobble and that he's coming, if you just shut up and don't fall in love with your calling so much, that eventually at some point he's going to come check it out. Well, this one came checked it out within 5 minutes. I mean, he must have came sprinting in, and I got lucky, and he came right to the blind, shot him. But that's, like I said, unknowingly, must have just been stuck in my subconscious that that's what you need to do. But it's really interesting to hear you verbalize it that way, because anybody who's turkey hunting right now can get some good advice just by listening to those tactics that you mentioned and trying to apply that in certain situations.
Yeah, hopefully. Like it's always tough, you know. Like I think in the case of your turkey, you could see him for a lot of the way he was approaching, right? Which is great. In a timber situation, sometimes too, you know, because when they walk, they generally don't gobble. So a lot of times you'll hear that turkey gobble close. It's like, oh, hey, he's coming, and then you might hear drumming. And you're like, okay, where is he? You're looking for him, you know. And boy, it'd be nice if he gobbled one more time so I could get that final fix on him to get my gun in position, you know. And then it's always a question of do I soft yelp again or not, or you know, and if you can't see him. But, you know, so I guess it's nice sometimes to continue calling as he's coming to the gun, just to keep coursing him and keep him on track, you know. I mean, if that's one you kind of go back and forth on every time when a turkey goes quiet like that and you think he's coming, you know. But then again, too, you can always readjust your gun if he does show up quietly. So
Yeah, hopefully you can move and he doesn't
right.
see it. Then.
Right. We've all been stuck in those situations.
One more question on this, because I could really, as much as I love deer, I could talk about this during turkey season all day long. But one thing that I've done, and tell me if this is correct, I don't know if it is or not, but normally, like in that situation, I yelped really loud, just trying to get something to respond, got him to respond, cut at him, responded good, he's coming. Now, as he was getting closer, he's probably within 150 yards maybe. I normally will switch, if I'm using a slate, I cannot do it on a mouth call. I switch to just 1 or 2 per sequences when I know that they're close enough and I just want to make sure I seal that deal. Is that kind of along the right lines?
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much conventional wisdom with working a turkey to the gun, you know. I mean, you strike him with the loud, aggressive stuff, getting fired up, and then bring him in with the soft calling at the very end to kind of seal the deal, you know. Now some people would say you can, you know, just keep yelping and cutting at him all the way to the gun. And with some turkeys you can too, you know. But, I mean, this is, like, again, you mentioned it does kind of play on his curiosity also, you know. I mean, he's fired up and he's coming. And so he's searching for that hen. So you're just giving him that little purr. You're just letting him hone in on where that hen is, you know, so he'll come looking for her. And you really don't need to do any more cutting or loud calling or anything like that. So yeah, I love using that tactic too. I mean, it's just kind of turkey 101. You know, you've had turkeys too, I think, where you do yelp them all the way to the gun. But honestly, if I get him coming and just, you know, want to get one more gobble or just kind of tell myself I'm sealing the deal, I'll just do a little clucking and purring right there at the very end, you know, and it seems to work like a charm most of the time.
Most of the time. You know, that's what I find absolutely fascinating about turkeys is that turkey knew exactly where that sound came. I mean, he came in and I saw him coming for 80 yards out through the woods. But when he popped up over the hill 15 yards away, he knew exactly the tree, the spot, the leaf where that sound came from. And he was looking right at me.
Yeah, yep. Well, that's the other thing too, you know, I mean, they are so good at coursing that sound, you know. I mean, the more you call to them, the better a fix they're going to get on it, you know. So, I mean, they're looking intently. So that just puts you under a microscope even more, you know.
Really got to be still.
Yeah, I mean, if you get a turkey fired up and he's coming and he's still kind of looking for the exact source of that sound, sometimes it might help you out a little bit. So, but either way, if you move, you're done anyway. So if you sit down wrong, you're done. I mean, that's part of the game we love, you know, because it's so critical at the very end just to have everything just right. So
awesome. Well, thanks, Brian. Thanks for the insights. Again, it's every Tuesday, but they're housed on Deer and Deer Hunting site. Right now, you can just type in turkey in the search spot of ddh.com, and you're going to get all these great turkey hunting tips as a bonus. We should call this deer and turkey talk now for today, but that's our bonus for this season. Before we go, if you want great deer hunting products, great deer hunting specials, angle coolers, Weston grinders, slicers, we got all sorts of cool venison processing equipment on sale at shopdeerhunting.com. Tyler's going to give you a code here up on the screen. It's a special only for Deer Talk Now listeners. If you enter Deer Talk in the coupon code when you check out, you get 10% off your order. It's a great deal, and we got some new items in the shop this week that you're going to want to check out. But everything from books to products to knives, I can't name it all. We have turkey hunting calls in there too. So just go to shopdeerhunting.com, check it out, enter Deer Talk in the checkout code when you exit. You're going to get 10% off your order. That's it for this week. Next week, we're going to be back here again. We're going to be talking about deer and deer hunting's upcoming August bow hunting issue, and we're going to be also talking about some other special things we got going on at deeranddeerhunting.com next week and the week beyond that. So for Brian Lovett, I'm Dan Schmidt. Thanks for joining us once again. We'll see you next time on Deer Talk Now.